The tribulation, that's a word that a lot of people are afraid of. It's a concept that is taught quite often in the church as God's judgment on the last people of the Bible, the last period of the Bible. Often that's called the Lord's Day. Well, today the prophet is going to talk about an aspect of the tribulation that many of us don't consider. And we're going to see a section in the book of Isaiah that really explains that day. And that's a term that he uses over and over again in this upcoming section of scripture between chapter 24 and chapter 27 of Isaiah. And we're going to be talking about God's judgment and the tribulation in various aspects. And we're going to do that when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. We talk about how to study, how to mark up your Bible, and how to apply it. And I'm here with my friend Jake Curtis, and Jacob and I are going to continue in the book of Isaiah. We're in chapter 24 today, and we're going to be seeing a new section starting. We just finished, Jake, the section on God's judgment of the nations. Remember that? Mm-hmm. We went through quite a few chapters of God was judging various nations, ending last week with chapter 23 and the judgment on Tyre. But we're going to see a new section starting that goes from chapter 24 all the way over to chapter 27. Now, we've already seen some prophecies saying there's going to be a kingdom coming after all these kingdoms, and that kingdom is going to be a final kingdom that will last forever, the kingdom of Messiah. Now, this section starts talking about the specific period of that judgment. We'll see a term used all through 24 to 27 called that day. And I've marked it a number of times where we see a discussion of what's going to happen on that day that God judges. And we're going to take a look at all the things that happen. Usually when we talk about the tribulation period, we talk about how people are going to suffer. And there's a fear even that, how am I going to suffer through the tribulation? We'll talk more about that later. Isaiah starts out with a very interesting aspect of that day. And there's a hint about it in chapter 24 with a repeated word. Did you notice any repeated words in chapter 24? Anything jump out at you?
Just the tense of the verbs.
Okay. The tense of the verbs, there's a lot of will. There's a lot of future tense. This is a future event of that day. But there's a word that's very interesting. It's repeated 16 times in this chapter, in chapter 24. In fact, it's actually in the English translation, it's repeated 18 times, but 2 of them are a different Hebrew word from the original Hebrew. That's 16 times one Hebrew word, and then twice he uses a completely different Hebrew word, and we're going to talk about that today. And that gives us a hint that the first of Isaiah's prophecy about that day, the end days, is God's judgment, not so much on people, but God's judgment on the earth. Now, I want to show you some notes here that I made very quickly. I noticed this, so I decided to start to do a Bible study on this word earth. It's a very common word. It's used like 2,500 times in the Old Testament. It's very common, and it basically means dirt or ground or a specific territory of ground, not a country as much as the actual elements of it. So that word earth starts out in verse 1, behold, the Lord lays the earth waste, devastates it, distorts its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. People are mentioned, but they're mentioned at the end of that verse. What's the first aspects of God's judgment that we see in verse 1.
About the earth.
Now we're going to see that word earth repeated over and over again because that's the focus. He is going to mention people. He's going to mention some judgment on some people, but it's very sporadic. The main section of verses is going to be about what's going to happen to the earth. And we'll see that as we go here. So I want you to look at verse 2. It'll make a point. Go ahead and read that.
And the people will be like the priest, the servant like his master, the maid like her mistress, the buyer like the seller, the lender like the borrower, the creditor like the debtor.
Now, what's it saying?
All the people are equal. There's nobody that's going to be set apart or different.
Exactly right. It's going to be, no matter how powerful you are, no matter what, there's going to be judgment on the people. And the reason that it's all the people that get equally judged is because they all live on the same planet. So when God judges the planet, he equally judges everybody who lives on it. So let's go with verse 3.
The earth will be completely laid waste and completely despoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word. Okay,
what does despoiled mean?
I assume it means similar to laid waste, but will be just emptied.
Despoiled, laid waste can be anything. A storm can lay waste. But this idea of somebody is going to come in and plunder it. Now, the other thing that's used in that verse is the word completely. You notice that? It's used twice. Read that verse, that's it again.
Well, I have the ESV. It's a little different. You want me to read that?
That's okay.
The earth shall be utterly empty and utterly plundered. For the Lord.
New American Standard says completely, but utterly. And that's a Hebrew word that means to completely pour out, to empty. So God is, first thing in his judgment, he is going to judge the earth and empty it of its worth, of its value. Okay? And no matter who lives on it, they're going to see the same judgment of that. So let's go on with verse 4.
The earth mourns and withers, the world fades and withers, the exalted of the people of the earth fade away. The earth is also polluted by its inhabitants, for they transgressed laws, violated statutes, broke the everlasting covenant.
Now, what does verse 5 say in the ESV?
The earth lies defiled under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws and violated the statutes and broken the everlasting covenant.
I really like the New American Standard using the word polluted, because that's a very modern word. That the earth that was created back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, God creates the earth and he says, it is good. And then man sins. And from that point on, the earth starts to be polluted. Man continually pollutes the earth until the final judgment is God looks at the earth and says, the earth is polluted, very modern, right out of the headlines of the day. And it's polluted because of why? Let's look at that verse. Verse 5. The earth also is polluted by its inhabitants, us, because they transgressed laws, violated statutes, broke the everlasting covenant. And that's a description of they sinned. And the pollution of man talks about that. And if you go down to Genesis chapter 3, verse 17, it says that man's sin starts to destroy the earth. There's going to be one of the first things God says is because of your sin, there's now going to be thorns and thistles, and the earth is going to moan because of what the effects of sin are. That makes sense?
Yep. Yeah.
So you see, the first place he's going is, he is talking about people, but his emphasis is on what God is going to do with the earth. And a lot of times we don't think about the fact that man's sin really had a negative effect, not just on the garden, but on the entire earth. We start to see that when God judges the earth with the rains, with the storm, with the flood. That's an entire earth thing. And God is going to rain judgment on the earth. And that's that word that's used over and over again. He's going to rain judgment on the dirt. Okay? So let's continue on. That early section up to verse 6 is all about God is going to judge the earth. And then it says, therefore, because God is going to judge the earth, a curse, and it's the curse of sin, God's judgment of sin, devours the dirt. Okay? And those who live in it are held guilty. Therefore, the inhabitants, this is talking about people, but it's talking about people in the aspect of the earth. The inhabitants of the earth are burned, and a few men are left, only a few. Now, what happens here is very clear that after God judges the earth, it's not going to be worth much. So this really goes to something we see in the book of Revelation, that after God is done judging the earth, there needs to be a new earth.
Yeah.
And we see that happen. You look up, and we're not going to read all these verses, but you look up Isaiah 65:17 and Isaiah 66:21 coming up, and it talks about God is going to judge the earth and then make a new one. And I want you to turn to 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 13 and read that.
But according to his promise, we are waiting for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells.
See, New Testament concept, Peter is saying, we're really looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth. Now, if you flip over to Revelation chapter 21, verse 1.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more.
There you go. The first heaven and the first earth are going to pass away, and the reason they're going to pass away is because of God's judgment of the earth. Yes, he's going to judge people, but he's going to judge people through judging the earth. And when he's done, he'll make a whole new earth, and we can look forward to that. Kind of neat how Isaiah ties into Revelation, and Peter definitely understood this to mean that there was going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So we pick up at verse 6 and just start reading and see what happens.
Therefore a curse devours the earth, and those who live in it are held guilty. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. The new wine mourns, the vine decays, and the merry-hearted sigh. The gaiety of tambourines ceases, the noise of revelers stops. The gaiety of the harp ceases. They do not drink wine with song. Strong drink is bitter to those who drink it.
Okay, now 7, 8, and 9 is a section that talks about agriculture, talks about the production of the vine, and it mentions all the merry-hearted sigh. It's talking about the harvest festivals when the grapes come in and there's a big party. It talks about it in Isaiah 16, verse 10. We talked about that earlier. So this section says, okay, through the judgment of the earth, agriculture is going to be affected amazingly to the point where there's going to be no more fruit produced by the land. And man is not going to be happy with what the land produces. There's no joy, there's no merriment because the land is judged. Do you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Now, then the next section he talks about is verse 10 to 12. As you read those three verses, let's ask, what is God judging in these three verses now?
The city of chaos is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none may enter. There is an outcry in the streets concerning the wine. All joy turns to gloom. The gaiety of the earth is banished. Desolation is left in the city, and the gate is battered to ruins.
Now we notice all these terms in that section of the city, the gates, the streets. It does mention wine again, but it's where the wine is consumed. So by judging the land, God is going to judge the cities. Now, what's the big deal with the cities? The cities represented where mankind built his strongholds, where he put his trust. If he could build a big enough city with a big enough wall, strong enough fortifications, a strong gate, he felt safe. And God is going to judge the cities to a point where man is no longer going to look at the city as a place of a stronghold, a place he could run and be safe. The cities are going to be decimated.
Yeah.
How? by judging the earth. You see that term used over and over again. So let's go back. This next section, let's read verse 13.
For thus it will be in the midst of the earth among the peoples, as the shaking of an olive tree, as the gleanings when the grape harvest is over.
All right. What is the shaking of the olive tree?
That's how you harvest the olives.
Okay. And then it talks about picking the grapes, right?
Yeah.
So what's going to happen to the earth is going to be God bringing in the harvest of judgment. It's the same kind of trauma that an olive tree goes through when it's shaken. In fact, the word shaken there in Hebrew could mean struck. Because that's how they would come to an olive tree. They would hit it, and that would vibrate it, and all the olives would fall. So basically what it's saying is God's judgment of the land is going to be a traumatic judgment of harvesting the intents and the beliefs of the people of the earth. And he's going to do it through the dirt.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. We don't think about this aspect very often when we think about the tribulation, but God's being very clear here. Now, if we look, there's a break. Read 14, 15, and 16.
They raise their voices, they shout for joy. They cry out from the west concerning the majesty of the Lord. Therefore, glorify the Lord in the east, the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, in the coastlands of the sea. From the ends of the earth we hear songs, glory to the righteous one. I say, woe to me, alas for me. The treacherous deal treacherously, and the treacherous deal very treacherously.
Now, who are the they in those verses?
I assume it's from verse, where was it? There was a few left on the earth or left?
Yeah, it's verse 6. The few that are faithful to the Lord are going to have joy in the midst of the tribulation. Look at that. They raise their voices. They shout for joy. It already is said there's no joy because there's no wine. The earth is judged. So the people that are getting the fruit of the ground, there's no joy. There's no harvest. But for the believer who gives glory to God, there is a joy even in the midst of tribulation. And it says, verse 15, therefore, O man, glorify the Lord. Do it in the east. Glorify the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, in the coastlands of the sea. Now, that's one of my favorite verses because back in 1969, I was praying about where I should move. I was living in South Dakota, and I was thinking about moving. And I said, Lord, where do you want me to move? And I was reading in Isaiah, and it said, glorify the Lord in the coastlands. And that word coastland means island. In other words, the land of coasts.
Okay.
And I read that, and just bang, right out, the Lord said to me, go and suffer in Hawaii. So that's a verse that's near and dear. I spent 20 years living in the coastlands, not very far from a coast in any direction. So I really like that verse. But now we're still back. We're talking about the judgment of the earth. It says from verse 16, the ends of the earth. That's this word dirt.
Mm-hmm.
But from the ends of the judged earth, we hear songs, glory to the righteous one. But the other side of that coin is, but I say, woe to me, alas for me, the treacherous deal treacherously, the treacherous deal very treacherously. Read verse 16 in the ESV.
Yeah, but I say, I waste away, woe is me. For the traitors have betrayed, with betrayal, the traitors have betrayed.
All right. So it's the treacherous, the traitors have done the treachery. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to look at a couple verses here. There's a cross reference to deal treacherously. And you go over here to the cross references, and you can see Jeremiah 3:20 and Jeremiah 5:11. And basically, this is talking about the world treats God treacherously. So this is not talking about treachery of people being treacherous to each other. This is people being treacherous toward God. Okay. And so it's the treacherous ones are being treacherous towards God. And I want
7.
you to go over to Hosea chapter 6, verse 7.
But like Adam, they transgressed the covenant. There they dealt faithlessly with me.
All right. That word faithlessly is exactly the same Hebrew word as treacherously. It was so this idea, the Hebrew is they dealt bad towards me, towards God. And if we go back to that verse, it's talking about woe is me because this judgment is based upon people being treacherous towards God, not towards each other. So now continuing on, this from verse 17 down to verse 20, we're going to read that. And it gives the impression that this judgment on the earth is going to be so comprehensive that there's just no way of escape. You try to get away and you just get in worse trouble because the entire dirt is being judged. Read from 17 down to 20.
Terror and pit and snare confront you, O inhabitant of the earth. Then it will be that he who flees the report of disaster will fall into the pit, and he who climbs out of the pit will be caught in the snare. For the windows above are opened, and the foundations of the earth shake. The earth is broken asunder, the earth is split through, the earth is shaken violently. The earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, and it tottered like a shack, for its transgression is heavy upon it, and it will fall never to rise again.
So that comes to the conclusion that this is all because of sin. God is judging the dirt, the earth. And all of those terms, earth, are all the same word in the Hebrew. And it just means the ground, the dirt. Okay. And it's because of sin. And you're not going to be able to get away from it because the first thing he's going to judge is where mankind lives. So he's going to judge the dirt. Okay. Now, if we read this next little section right down to the end, we finally see this term, verse 21, so it will happen in that day. Now, that term, I've marked it because as we go into chapter 25, chapter 26, and chapter 27, we're going to see that term, that day, used over and over again. And this chapter 24 is about that day that God judges the earth. And we're going to see something very interesting. So read verse 21.
So it will happen in that day that the Lord will punish the host of heaven on high and the kings of the earth on earth.
Now read it in the ESV.
On that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of the earth on the earth.
Okay, so ESV uses the same word earth again.
Yep.
But it's interesting. Those two words, earth, the kings of the earth on earth, are going to be punished, are going to be judged because of sin, that up in verse 20. But there it's a different Hebrew word. And there it means owned land. It means arable land, usable land. It's not just the dirt. It's the dirt that men own. Okay. And here he's saying it's a kind of almost a change in subject that he's basically saying in 21. Not only is God going to judge the dirt, he's going to judge the dirt that is parceled off that belongs to various kings. So nations aren't going to matter. They're all going to be judged because of sin. In verse 22, they will be gathered together like prisoners in the dungeon and will be confined in prison. They are being the kings of the earth. And after many days, they will be punished. Then the moon will be abashed and the sun ashamed, because the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and his glory will be before his elders. Now, there's a couple of things I want to look at, just these last few verses as we're looking here. Look at where it says, the moon will be ashamed and the sun ashamed. Turn in Isaiah to chapter 60 verse 19 and 20.
The sun shall be no more your light by day, nor for brightness shall the moon give you light, but the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your
So
sun
again,
shall, yeah,
go ahead. It's basically talking about the judgment again, all the way to chapter 60 is the same thing. The moon and the sun are affected by the judgment. So not only the dirt, but the cosmos, the sun and the moon, are also affected. Now, if you go over to Revelation chapter 22, verse 5,
okay. And night will be no more. They will need no light or lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever.
there again, in the context of God's judgment, he's going to affect the creation, not only the dirt, but he's also going to affect the sun and the moon for his glory.
Yeah. Okay.
We really see this section ending, and his glory will belong to the elders. In other words, God's judgment, the ultimate purpose of God's judgment, we've talked about this before, isn't just to beat people up, and it isn't just to destroy the earth. It's to bring about repentance, the faithful few that we saw in verse 6 that are going to respond to God, give him glory, and have joy even in the midst of tribulation. So that day is going to end with God getting glory. Now, the ultimate, you could say, is talking about the tribulation period, then it's talking about the millennial kingdom, where it says they'll be prisoners for a while, and then after many days, they'll be brought forth and they'll be punished. That could all be the great white throne judgment at the end. But the purpose of this text is to say that no matter the judgment of the earth, God will get glory. He'll get glory from the few people that recognize he is the one. And I marked in my Bible, in those verses, these three phrases: the Lord will punish. And down here, the Lord of hosts will reign, and his glory will be. So that you have the summation of the whole purpose of the Lord's day of judgment is the Lord is going to punish because of sin that we see up in verse 20, and he's going to reign. We see that in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 9, that God reigns in his judgment. And then we'll see the ultimate of the judgment is he will receive glory before his people. And that's bringing us to the end of that first day. So it's very interesting. Isaiah picks the first element of God's judgment he wants to talk about is what God is going to do to the earth.
Yeah, interesting.
Just a good perspective. And we're going to go into the next section. He's going to talk about the kingdom next week in chapter 25. And we'll do that as we continue on in our study. Any comments? Any observations? Did you see anything in 24 that you really hadn't thought about before?
I think I made the connection of the earth. Obviously, it says it a bunch, but in the ESV in verse 1, it says that he will twist its surface. And I was like, interesting how, and then later it'll, like earthquakes and things like that, maybe a part of this judgment.
He's going to judge the dirt. And
yeah.
He'll twist it, he'll turn it, he'll judge it. He's going to make it awful for the people that live there, all for the point of getting them to repent of their sin in verse 20. It's a good observation. Something to think about, especially in the verse that talks about the whole earth is polluted because man is sinful. So let's not blame global warming on nature. Man is to blame, and that way the environmentalists are right. But not because of man's industry, it's because of man's sin and man's neglect of God's laws that has destroyed the earth. And God is going to finish that destruction in judgment. We'll pick this up next week. Hope you guys enjoyed it on YouTube. Love to hear your comments about that day. And we'll be back next week. The tribulation and the Lord's day and what that day means. I recommend a video to you. It's called The Last Week of Tribulation. It's on a series I did about the doctrines of the faith and I think you'll enjoy it. And listen, we're going to continue in our study next week. Until then, God bless you.